his kind of perspective from as an Algerian civil society activist on why he thinks the situation is alarming and what does it mean for Algeria. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nadej, and thanks to all the team of the CIHRS Institute and for the other organizers. Yeah, you will allow me maybe to repeat some points and to give them another perspective, and to add another point. The first point I think is that there is a clear will from the authorities to shut down the Hirak. That's the first point. The second point is that we can see that all civic spaces and critical voices are under threat, and the authorities want to strangle them, and now showed how they proceed, how they want to do it. The third point is that the institutional participation, the participation into the institutional life, political institutional life, is a political deadlock as well. So all the doors are closed today, and this shows that there is a huge gap between the reality and the official discourse of the authorities. Since 2019, the authorities pretend that they are protecting the constitutional order and rebuilding the institutions after the 20-year-long Bouteflika's rule. The authorities presented as well the 2020 revision of the constitution as the cornerstone of the new Algeria, which is supposed to be more democratic. Yeah, and you can see that the reality is completely different. Algeria today is a more authoritarian state and a more military state than before 2019. If we look at the freedom of peaceful demonstration that Mr. Woul emphasized on this aspect, we can see that it's supposed to be guaranteed by the constitution on a simple notification regime since 2020. But when we have a closer look to the legislation, we can see that they didn't change the legislation, and it's still based on the authorization regime. And you said, Mr. Woul, that the principle the notification should be the principle. In Algeria, it's not the principle. The principle is nor the notification nor the authorization, it's the prohibition of demonstrations. The authorities are preventing all demonstrations in Algeria, and they want, by preventing all, by prohibiting and forbidding all the demonstrations, they want to shut down the Hirak, because, as you know, the main visible power of the Hirak, it was this huge peaceful demonstrations in the country, in small towns and in the big cities. The same thing is so. The first goal of the Algerian authorities is clearly to shut down the Hirak and to eliminate all this very specific, very peaceful and extremely impressive demonstrations of the beginning and after the resuming. So this is the very first point. If we see, Amna spoke about the freedom of association, and she mentioned what happened to SOS Mouloud and to Rassemblement Action Jeunesse. It's clear that there is a gap between what the constitution says, which is supposed to encourage now the creation of association on the basis of simple notification, and the reality. The reality is the legislation, the 2012 law on association, which is very, very, very restrictive, is still in force, and the dissolution of HAJ has been engaged. Engaged on the basis of this law. So we can see that this civic space is being closed, and that they are attacking as well the political parties, critical political parties, which are already banned from the mass media, which cannot organize public activities in public space, for instance, even in their own offices. Sometimes they are under threat, and the two political parties that Amna mentioned today, UCP and PST, are under the threat of dissolutions. And here appears the second goal of the authorities is to eliminate all the civic spaces and that they don't control, and eliminate all the critical voices, including eliminating, not physically of course, including human rights defenders. They want to make them silent. The third point is about the institutional life. According to the official line, the authorities encourage the involvement in the institutional political life, and in the elections they organize and they control. So this way, the participation in the institutions is presented as a democratic way of expression. Whereas, according to the official line, the current hierarchy deviates from the original hierarchy of the beginning, the 2 first months, and the current hierarchy is presented as an anti-democratic movement. It is a corrupted hierarchy, inspired according to an official propaganda campaign, which is inspired by the enemies of Algeria, according, of course, to the regime's propaganda. So it's simple. There is a simple picture in the propaganda. There is the hierarchy activists who want civilian democratic state. They are traitors and now labeled terrorists, and the regime supporters are patriots, and it's simple. So, but when we look at the involvement in the institutional life, we notice first, we noticed it already. The civic spaces are under a huge pressure. The critical political parties are preventing from having public activities, banned from the mass public media, and the results of the last elections held in a repressive climate with no independent monitoring, and even with no voters, maybe few voters. The results of the election confirm that the participation-based approach is a political deadlock. So those who left the hierarchy and followed the path of the participation in the institution have not been rewarded because they didn't gain anything. That means that there is clearly no will in the regime sphere for making even the smallest change. And Mr. Wu told us that the authorities don't answer his letters, and they don't want to let him go to visit Algeria. So we can see it in the institutional political life, and we can see it in the corruption. There are criminal proceedings against corruption, against some businessmen and politicians, former politicians, some of them resulting in prison sentences. But the network of corruption is still active. These criminal proceedings do not threaten this network, which benefits now to other actors. And so if we have a closer look at the so-called reforms, we can see that they do not answer they did not answer any single demand of the hierarchy since the destitution of Bouteflika, President Bouteflika. So from both the institutional aspect and the human rights aspect, the situation is worse than in 2019 at the beginning of the hierarchy. So what we can say at the end is that the regime is the authorities are playing a kind of strategy of tension, which is extremely dangerous, especially when they politically instrumentalize the accusation of terrorism. Amna spoke about the revision of the criminal code. Now it's clear when you read this new amendment to the criminal code, which has 10 days, which has been published on the 9th of June, that when you want to change the government, the system of governance, the government system in Algeria by any means, it means even by non-violent means, but with non-constitutional, not contrary to the constitution, but non-constitutional ways, it means that you're a terrorist. It's whether you use violence or you don't use violence. So the question of violence is not important. Which is important is that you want to change the regime. So this is clear. It's a layer, or it's a clear, not criminal. It's more than the criminalization of the hierarchy, because what the hierarchy wants. The hierarchy wants the change of the political system. So the hierarchy as a whole is labeled implicitly as terrorist. So this is very very alarming, especially when you can understand from that the authorities are with this in this kind of strategy of tension. They are how do you say reactivating the threat of chaos and presenting the peaceful activists as the danger for the country, for the unity of the country. And we saw all the different provisions, the 20 provisions of the penal code that are used against peaceful protesters. So what we need now, when we see that in the last revision of the criminal code, there is a specific provision which provides for up to 15 years of prison for individuals who share information deemed classified, but on ongoing proceedings before the judicial. So it means that the authorities want to have a repression behind closed doors. So it's very important to shed light on this repression and not to shed it light before, to shed light in bilateral talks with, behind closed doors, but publicly with strong and clear statements condemning these very negative developments during the Human Rights Council, of course, but beyond. Whether we consider the situation from principle perspective or from real politics perspective, it's very important to give a very strong signal to the authorities before the situation becomes irreversible, and I hope it